The forced cheerfulness in her voice was like sandpaper against my nerves. "Honestly, darling, we just assumed you'd be thrilled we decided to host the annual family reunion here. It's just so for everyone, isn't it?" The way she said, "convenient," dripped with a saccharine faux consideration that made my stomach clench. My resort. Meticulously built haven, the one I'd poured my lifeblood into, the one that had always been my escape from the suffocating chaos of our blended family. And now, was acting like she'd bestowed a gift upon me. My life, before this particular brand of intrusion, had been a carefully constructed calm. Years spent painstakingly building this place, brick by painstaking brick, from a derelict patch of land into a serene, luxurious escape. It was my sanctuary, a testament to my hard work, a place where I could finally breathe. But the air had always been thick with the unspoken. My father's remarriage to Carol had brought with it a storm of entitlement, a constant, low-grade hum of disrespect that I'd learned to ignore. Her children, Mark and Sarah, were the epitome of this, polished, smug, and utterly convinced the world owed them a living. They'd always treated my father's assets as a shared buffet, and now, it seemed, my hard-won peace was next on the menu. I remembered the summer after my father married Carol. Mark, barely out of his teens, had borrowed my vintage motorcycle, a prized possession I'd spent months restoring. He'd returned it with a dented fender and a nonchalant shrug, muttering something about a slight mishap while he was out impressing some girl. My father, bless his ever-optimistic heart, had smoothed it over, buying Mark a new fender and telling me to be more understanding. Understanding. That was the operative word. I understood that Carol and her brood saw everything as theirs for the taking, my possessions included. Then there was the time Sarah had helped herself to the antique Persian rug in my study. It was an heirloom, passed down from my grandmother. I'd walked in to find her sprawled on it, sipping wine and making a mess. When I'd gently pointed out it wasn't exactly for lounging, she'd given me that infuriating, wide-eyed innocent look, as if I was being unreasonable. "Oh, but it's comfortable, and it matches my new outfit perfectly," she'd trilled. My father had intervened again, diffusing the situation with a strained smile and a promise to buy Sarah a similar rug. The original remained stained, a silent testament to her carelessness and my father's futile attempts at peacekeeping. Each incident, small on its own, chipped away at my resolve, eroding my patience. I became a master of the quiet nod, the stifled sigh, the internal scream. The invitation, or rather, the announcement, had arrived in the form of a hastily printed flyer slipped under my door. It detailed that annual Miller family reunion, hosted by Carol and, with a prominent, glossy photo of Carol beaming, her arms slung possessively around my father. The location was listed as the Serenity Shores Resort. My Serenity Shores. It was a declaration of war, thinly veiled in pastel cardstock. The day they arrived, the air at Serenity Shores felt thick with an almost palpable sense of entitlement. Carol, dressed in a pristine white pantsuit that screamed expense, surveyed the manicured grounds with a critical eye. Mark, looking bored and radiating an aura of self-importance, had his phone surgically attached to his hand, while Sarah, draped in designer clothes, was already directing staff around as if she owned the place. They'd swarmed my resort, their laughter too loud, their demands too frequent. They treated my staff like personal servants, barking orders and complaining about minor inconveniences. The moment of truth arrived during the welcome dinner. I'd tried to steer clear, letting my manager handle the guest interactions, but Carol had insisted I be present. I sat at the head of a table laden with food I'd carefully selected, trying to project an air of calm authority I was far from feeling. The conversation, predictably, revolved around how wonderful it was that Carol and my father were hosting. "It's just so much easier when you have a place like this," Carol said, her gaze sweeping over the chandeliers and the soft lighting, her voice carrying across the dining room. "Makes it feel like a proper family affair, not just some hotel booking. Thank goodness you have such a generous father, isn't that right, dear?" She turned to me, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Mark and Sarah chimed in, echoing her sentiment, their eyes flicking towards me with a mixture of disdain and amusement, as if I were merely the backdrop to their grand family reunion. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. They were subtly, and not so subtly, implying that my father's wealth, which had funded my resort, somehow made it extended family property now, and I was merely the caretaker. The humiliation was a cold, hard knot in my gut. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a desperate urge to shout, to reclaim my space. But I held my tongue. I watched Carol's smug satisfaction, the way she basked in the adulation of her own children, and a different kind of resolve began to solidify within me. This wasn't about anger, it was about ownership. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and strained conversation. I excused myself early, the weight of their casual dismissal pressing down on me. Sleep offered little respite, filled with nightmares of my resort being overrun, my life's work dismantled by their insatiable need. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that was both chilling and invigorating. The quiet, simmering resentment that had been my constant companion for years finally ignited into a cold, focused flame. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to argue or plead. I was going to end it. I spent the morning in my office, the one they'd barely glanced at, dismissing it as my dad's old paperwork room. The mahogany desk, the leather-bound ledgers, the carefully organized files, these were my arsenal. I pulled out a thick manila folder, its label discreetly stamped, Serenity Shores, Ownership and Foundation Documents. Inside, nested amongst architectural plans and financial statements, was the deed. The deed, signed and notarized, listing only one name, mine. And beneath it, the equally important documents detailing the independent financing, the loans I'd personally secured, the years of diligent repayment that had transformed a risky venture into a thriving business. My father had provided the initial seed capital, a loan that had been meticulously repaid with interest, well before Carol had entered the picture. Later that afternoon, as Carol was holding court by the pool, regaling a group of my guests with exaggerated tales of her family's generosity, I walked out. I didn't announce myself. I simply appeared, a silent observer in the periphery of their manufactured festivity. I waited until Carol's voice reached its crescendo, boasting about how had suggested this perfect location. Then, I stepped forward, my manager by my side, carrying a small, elegant wooden box. The chatter died down. All eyes turned to me. Carol, mid-sentence, faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face as if I were an unexpected interruption. "Carol," I said, my voice calm, clear, and carrying effortlessly across the hushed space. "You seem to be under the impression that you are hosting this event. And that this property is somehow a shared family asset." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The smug smiles on Mark and Sarah's faces began to waver. "This is my resort," I continued, my gaze unwavering, locking onto Carol's increasingly bewildered expression. "Every inch of it. Built with my capital, my sweat, and my vision. My father me the initial funds, a debt that has long since been repaid, with interest. All legal and documented, of course." I gestured towards my manager, who opened the wooden box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a single, gleaming key. Not a resort key, but a heavy, antique brass key, the key to the private vault at my bank, where the original deed and all associated financial documents were kept. "However," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, the implication far more potent than any shout. "Given your enthusiasm for managing things, I've decided to make a few changes to the operational oversight." I looked at Carol, a slow, almost imperceptible smile finally gracing my lips. "I'll be personally overseeing all bookings and management from now on. And to ensure absolute clarity, effective immediately, all access to my private offices, my staff quarters, and indeed, any part of Serenity Shores not designated as guest accommodation, will require my explicit, personal authorization." I held up the key. "This," I said, my voice like ice, "unlocks the secure repository of the true ownership. And these," I gestured to my manager, who began distributing printed copies of the deed and a concise summary of the loan repayment schedule, "will be distributed to all guests. Just to avoid any further confusion." The stunned silence that followed was more satisfying than any applause. Carol's face, moments before flushed with triumph, drained of color. Mark's phone clattered from his nerveless fingers. Sarah let out a small, strangled gasp. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. They looked at each other, then at the documents, then back at me, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning panic. The casual arrogance, the ingrained entitlement, had met a wall of cold, hard facts. The aftermath was a symphony of their desperation. Within hours, my phone was buzzing incessantly. Carol's frantic texts accused me of being ungrateful and unreasonable, claiming I was ruining the family. My father, bless his perpet. Yuli's confused heart, called, his voice laced with a plea for calm, asking if I had misunderstood something. Mark and Sarah, predictably, launched a barrage of veiled threats and attempts to rally other family members to their side, painting me as the villain who had disrupted their joyous reunion. Flying monkeys, they were, scrambling to defend their tarnished territory. But it was too late. The narrative had shifted. The carefully constructed illusion of Carol's benevolent hosting had shattered, replaced by the undeniable truth of my ownership. The printed deeds and repayment schedules, discreetly shared among the guests by my competent staff, had done their work. The whispers started. The knowing glances. Carol, who had basked in the imagined glow of her own generosity, was now exposed as an interloper, her claims of ownership revealed as hollow. Mark and Sarah, accustomed to operating with impunity, found themselves facing an unexpected consequence: social embarrassment. Their friends, many of whom were also guests at the resort, saw their entitlement for what it was. The veneer of sophistication cracked, revealing the petty greed beneath. Their carefully curated images took a significant hit. Carol's reign of informal management at my father's various properties came to an abrupt halt. The quiet execution of my rights had not only reclaimed my resort but had also subtly undermined her influence elsewhere. The financial implications were less direct, but the blow to her ego, her carefully constructed persona of the capable, influential matriarch, was devastating. She had sought to humiliate me on my own turf, and instead, she had orchestrated her own public unmasking. The final text from Carol, sent late that night, was a venomous tirade filled with accusations of betrayal and selfishness. I read it, deleted it, and then wiped my phone. The silence that followed was profound. No more frantic calls, no more passive-aggressive digs. Just the quiet hum of the resort, the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore, and the satisfying stillness of a battle won, not with fury, but with unassailable proof. There was no grand pronouncement, no victory lap. Just the quiet, cold knowledge that I had reclaimed what was mine, not just in deed, but in spirit. The humiliation had been theirs to bear, a lasting testament to the folly of underestimating a quiet owner.